You are not crazy.
No, you're really not.
And you are not broken either. I think that's the most important thing to establish right off the bat. The profound confusion that, that bone-deep exhaustion you are feeling right now, it is not a personal failure.
Exactly. It's actually a highly predictable, mathematically precise symptom of psychological warfare.
Which is such a heavy term, but so necessary.
Oh.
Because what you are experiencing is scientifically documented. And for anyone listening who feels like they are, like they're just losing their grip on reality, or who is exhausted from trying to explain the completely unexplainable to their friends and family, this deep dive is for you.
Yeah, it really is. Because for a lot of people listening, this might honestly be the very first time that your invisible wounds are being given a formal name and, a clinical explanation.
Right. And we have a massive stack of material in front of us today to help do exactly that. We're looking at comprehensive clinical guidelines, decades of trauma research, and the latest behavioral science regarding covert narcissistic abuse, complex trauma, and the exact clinical roadmap to recovery.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But our mission today is to decode something that thrives entirely in the dark.
And the clinical literature we're pulling from today is incredibly validating on this front. Whether you are, trying to make sense of a romantic relationship that just left you completely gutted, or a family dynamic that always felt off but you couldn't articulate why, or even a toxic workplace.
Oh man, the toxic workplaces,
Yeah.
where you're just inexplicably targeted and drained.
Exactly. The science provides what is essentially the ultimate psychological decoder ring. We are going to unpack exactly what happened, why it happened, and most importantly, how you actually heal from it.
Yeah. So I think we need to start by looking at the invisible weapon itself, the thing that causes this specific type of psychological injury. Because when most people hear the word narcissist or they think about emotional abuse, a very specific image pops into your head. Right?
Oh, absolutely. The classic stereotype.
Right. Like we think of the loud, arrogant, chest-thumping exhibitionist. The person who demands the best table at the restaurant, yells at the waiter, talks over everyone at the party.
And leaves this massive trail of obvious destruction wherever they go.
Exactly. But that's not what we're talking about today.
No, it's not. What you just described is the classic presentation of a grandiose narcissist. And they are highly visible. You see that threat coming from a mile away. But the research we are looking at today focuses on a completely different presentation of the exact same underlying pathology.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It really is. It's what clinicians call diagnostic camouflage.
Diagnostic camouflage.
Yeah. So where the grandiose narcissist uses overt domination, the covert narcissist uses stealth. They often appear shy. They might seem deeply vulnerable, maybe introverted, or they utilize a highly effective defense mechanism that researchers call performative altruism.
Performative altruism. Okay, I really want to linger on that. Because when I was reading through the sources, that concept chilled me to the bone. That's the person who is publicly known as an absolute saint, right?
It is the ultimate psychological smokescreen. Think about the spiritual leader who speaks so eloquently from a stage about boundless grace and forgiveness, right? But then behind closed doors, they relentlessly terrify and belittle their family.
Wow. Yeah.
Or it's the mother who is famous in the whole neighborhood for bringing casseroles to the sick neighbor. She volunteers at every single bake sale.
But she emotionally starves and manipulates her own kids.
Exactly. Or, going back to the workplace, it's the boss who posts on LinkedIn every day about company culture and empathy and mental health. But then they systematically isolate, gaslight, and target their most competent employees in these private one-on-one meetings.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the analogy that came to mind for me when reading this, if grandiose narcissism is a tornado, right? It's loud, it's destructive, it rips the roof off the house, and it's so obvious to everyone that you immediately know to run for the storm cellar.
Right.
But covert narcissism is like carbon monoxide.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Because it's invisible, it's completely odorless, and you don't even realize you are being poisoned until you are already passing out on the floor.
That carbon monoxide metaphor perfectly captures the lived experience of the victims.
Yeah.
And to understand why an abuser chooses this specific invisible method, we have to look at the hidden emotional need driving the behavior.
What's driving them? If they're not looking for the spotlight, what do they want?
Well, here's the thing. The covert narcissist has the exact same insatiable need for power, control, and admiration as the grandiose narcissist.
Wiley. The exact same need?
Identical. The core pathology is exactly the same. But the covert narcissist is hobbled by an intense, paralyzing fear of failure and a deep, deep well of toxic shame.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. They cannot risk strutting onto the center stage because they are terrified of being exposed as frauds. So they have to extract their narcissistic supply. And by supply, I mean that lifeblood of admiration and control. They have to extract it through sideways methods.
Meaning what, practically?
Through victimhood and pseudo-humility.
Wait, okay, I'm struggling to wrap my head around that part. They extract power through victimhood. That seems entirely counterintuitive. How does being weak give you power over someone else?
It works because it is a highly sophisticated way to hijack a really empathetic person's nervous system.
Hijack their empathy.
Wow. Right. Think about it. If I am always the victim, if I am constantly suffering from, mysterious ailments or bad luck, or these cruel ex-partners who supposedly ruined my life, I become utterly immune to your criticism.
Because how could you attack a victim?
Exactly. You cannot hold me accountable for my bad behavior, because how could you be so cruel as to attack someone who was already hurting so much?
Oh, man, that is so manipulative.
It creates an impenetrable shield. And it leads to this ultimate psychological paradox that drives victims to the absolute brink of despair, which is the public versus private split.
Right, because the person who is emotionally destroying you in private is the exact same person that society views as a martyr or a saint.
And that creates profound, just crushing isolation for the target. Because when you finally reach a breaking point and you try to speak up, neutral third parties, and terribly, sometimes even your own family, they meet your cries for help with intense skepticism.
They don't believe you.
They look at you and they literally say, him, but he's so quiet and gentle. Or her, but she does so much for the community, You must be misinterpreting her intentions. Are you sure you aren't overreacting?
Which just beautifully, or I guess tragically, reinforces the abuser's primary weapon, which is gaslighting. Because if the whole world thinks you're the crazy one, you eventually start to believe it yourself.
And that is the goal. Things like coercive control, passive aggression, emotional withholding, the silent treatment. These are weapons designed to leave no physical bruises.
Right. No evidence.
Right. They use subtle digs disguised as jokes, and the moment you react with hurt or anger, the trap just snaps shut.
Yeah.
They look at you with total calm, just deadpan, and say, wow, you were so sensitive. I was just kidding. Why are you always starting fights?
And suddenly you are the aggressor.
Exactly. Suddenly you are the aggressor, and they are the poor victim of your completely unreasonable emotional outburst.
So here's my question, though. Because if they are this manipulative and the environment they create is this uniquely toxic, how do they hook smart, capable people in the first place? Because looking at the clinical data here, it explicitly states that covert narcissists do not target weak or gullible people.
No, they don't. Not at all.
They actively target highly empathetic, incredibly resilient, often very competent individuals. Why? Why go after the strong ones?
Well, it's actually a brilliant survival strategy on the part of the abuser, because a parasite doesn't attach itself to a dying host, right?
Good point.
It attaches itself to the strongest, most vibrant host it can find so it can extract the absolute maximum amount of energy. But the way they hook these capable people relies on a deeply unconscious mechanism called a customized projection.
Customized projection. What does that actually look like in practice? Like, how are they gathering that data to customize it?
So, covert abusers are master observers in the beginning. They study you. They listen incredibly intently to everything you say. But not because they care. They're gathering data. They are scanning for your unmet childhood needs.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It is. It looks like the most intense, soulful conversation of your entire life.
Yeah.
You sit there and you tell them about how you always felt invisible in your family growing up, or how you always had to be the strong one and take care of everybody else.
And you think you're just bonding.
Exactly. You think you are building deep intimacy. But they're taking notes. If you lacked a protector, they suddenly present themselves as fiercely protective of you. If you lacked intellectual validation, they become your greatest intellectual admirer.
So they just mirror whatever you're missing.
Right. They engineer a persona that acts as the exact puzzle piece to fit your specific lifelong emotional void. They make you feel profoundly, uniquely seen and chosen.
Okay, so they custom build this mirage of the perfect partner or the perfect best friend or mentor. I get how that reels someone in. That makes perfect sense. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where I think a lot of outsiders get so frustrated with victims.
The staying part.
Yes. Once that hook is in and the mask finally slips, How does a highly intelligent person stay? You always hear people on the outside say, if they are treating you terribly, just use logic, pack your bags, and leave. But the research shows this isn't a failure of intellect at all, is it?
Not in the slightest. What outsiders are demanding is a cognitive solution to a biological problem.
A biological problem. Okay, let's get into this.
Yeah, we have to move completely out of the realm of psychology and into neurobiology to understand this. Because the cycle of abuse, which typically operates in 4 distinct stages, love bombing, devaluation, the discard, and hoovering, it does not just mess with your mind. It fundamentally hijacks your nervous system.
Okay, let's ground that in the biology then. Let's start with that first stage, the love bombing, which is that customized projection we just talked about. When someone is mirroring your deepest needs and making you feel like the most special person on earth, what is literally happening inside your brain?
So during that love bombing phase, your brain's reward centers are absolutely flooded with a cocktail of neurochemicals, primarily dopamine and oxytocin.
Dopamine and oxytocin.
Right. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of motivation and reward. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It's the exact same chemical released between a mother and a newborn infant. It creates deep, profound feelings of trust and safety. Your brain is essentially categorizing this new person as your ultimate safe harbor. You are biologically coding them as home.
Wow. But then, obviously, the abuser inevitably shifts into the devaluation stage. The warmth just disappears. It's replaced by cold criticism, withholding affection, maybe an unexplained silent treatment that lasts for 3 days.
And this is where the biological trap snaps shut. Because when that sudden, completely inexplicable coldness hits, your brain perceives a massive threat to your survival.
Because your safe harbor just turned on you.
Exactly. And your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which is your body's central stress response system, it activates instantly. It floods your nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline, your heart rate spikes, your digestion shuts down, and you are plunged into a state of sheer terror and panic.
But the source of this terror is the exact person who was just your safe harbor. I'm trying to understand how the brain reconciles that. Yeah. If a tiger is attacking you, you run away from the tiger. Why isn't the victim run from the abuser?
Because the brain becomes desperately confused. The hidden truth of this neurobiological nightmare is that the brain becomes wired to seek relief from the exact person causing the pain.
Oh my God.
Because they were the source of that massive oxytocin flood previously, your brain chemically equates the abuser with regulation and survival. You don't view them as the tiger. You view them as the only cure for the tiger bite.
The only cure for the bite. That's incredible.
And so you will do anything, you will compromise any boundary just to get them to smile at you again, just to stop that unbearable flood of cortisol in your body.
It's an addiction. I mean, it sounds exactly like drug addiction.
It is a literal physiological addiction. This phenomenon was conceptualized by Dr. Patrick Carnes as trauma bonding, and it is formed and cemented through intermittent reinforcement.
Intermittent reinforcement. That's the behavioral science term for the slot machine effect, right?
Yes. It's the exact same mechanism that keeps a gambler sitting at a slot machine in a casino for 14 hours straight. Think about it. If a slot machine paid out a jackpot every single time you pulled the lever, it would quickly become boring.
Right.
But if it never paid out once, you would get frustrated and walk away. It is the unpredictability, the tiny random glimpses of a win, or in this case, a tiny glimpse of that original loving person that deeply hooks the dopamine system. You become obsessed with figuring out the rules to get the love back.
You think, if I just pull the lever the right way, if I just phrase this perfectly, they'll go back to loving me.
Exactly.
And reading through the sources, there is a terrifying side effect to this trauma bond. As the victim becomes more and more obsessed with regulating the abuser's moods just to survive the day, they experience a massive narrowing of their world. The research notes a literal loss of empathy for anyone except the narcissist.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance becomes staggering at this point. You are holding 2 violently opposing beliefs in your mind at the exact same time. This person is my ultimate savior, and this person is actively destroying me.
Which has to break your brain eventually.
It does. To survive that level of psychological tension without your psyche just snapping, your brain has to shut down its bandwidth for the outside world.
Wow.
You simply don't have the energy to care about your friend's problems anymore or your career ambitions.
Just abandon yourself.
You abandon your own identity, your own boundaries, and you become hyper-focused solely on catering to the abuser. You're just desperately pulling the lever on that slot machine, trying to get back to the safety of the love bombing phase.
Which brings us to the inevitable long-term cost. Because if you live inside that biological trap for years, riding that cortisol and adrenaline roller coaster every single day, waking up in a panic, walking on eggshells, what does that do to the human body? Because the clinical guidelines make it abundantly clear. Covert emotional abuse doesn't just make you sad. It structurally changes your physiology.
It does. It brings us directly into the territory of complex PTSD or CPTSD.
Right, which is different from standard PTSD.
Very different. Most people are familiar with standard PTSD, which is often linked to a single discrete traumatic event. So a terrifying car crash, a physical assault, a specific combat situation. With standard PTSD, there is usually a very clear before and after the event.
But the trauma from covert narcissistic abuse doesn't have a clear beginning. There is no single explosion that you can point to and say, that's when it happened.
Exactly. CPTSD is relational, it is repetitive, it's chronic, and it's incredibly subtle. It happens when the trauma is ongoing, invisible, and escape feels completely impossible. We actually have a major systematic review here from The Lancet that outlines this beautifully.
Oh, yes, I read that one.
They show that CPTSD includes the standard trauma symptoms like hypervigilance, where you are startling at loud noises, and avoidance behaviors, but it adds a crucial third category that they call disturbances in self-organization.
Disturbances in self-organization. That sounds, very academic. What does that actually feel like when you wake up on Tuesday morning and try to just go about your life?
It feels like profound emotional dysregulation. It feels like a chronic, aching emptiness in your chest all the time. And above all, it feels like a total shattering of your own identity. You literally look in the mirror and you do not know who you are anymore.
Wow.
You don't know what you like, what you believe, or what your values are because your entire selfhood was cannibalized to serve the abuser's needs.
It makes me think of a smartphone that is running a massive invisible background program, like a virus scanner, that is just whirring 24/7. Even if you aren't actively using the phone, the battery is constantly draining, the device is overheating, and if you try to open a simple app like your calendar, the whole thing crashes because you have zero cognitive processing power left.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize the nervous system of a CPTSD survivor. The body acts as a somatic archive. We really have to stop thinking of trauma as just bad memories floating around in the mind. Trauma is literally stored in your fascia, your muscle tissue, your digestive tract.
Your body keeps the score, as they say.
Exactly. The victim gets stuck in a permanent biological freeze state. They are walking through the grocery store perpetually braced for a psychological attack that they can't even see. Their shoulders are permanently up by their ears, their breathing is incredibly shallow, and their immune system is deeply compromised.
And as we dig into the work of researchers like Jax McKenzie and even tracing back to Carl Jung, they point out that all of this physical tension, this whole somatic archive, revolves around one ultimate core wound. It's not just fear of the abuser. There's something deeper that gets implanted.
Yes. The deepest, most devastating wound of covert abuse is the implantation of toxic shame.
Toxic shame, how is it different from regular guilt?
Well, guilt is the feeling of, I did something bad. Toxic shame is the unbearable, somatic, cellular belief of, I am bad. I am fundamentally defective, broken, and unlovable.
All so heavy.
And here's the insidious part. The covert narcissist carries an ocean of their own toxic shame, but they refuse to feel it. So through years of subtle gaslighting and projection, they literally offload their shame into the victim's body. Over time, the victim internalizes it completely. They start to truly believe that the abuse is happening because they inherently deserve it.
Okay, so the body is a somatic archive full of toxic shame, the nervous system is running a background virus, and the brain is biologically addicted to the source of the pain. How on earth do you get out? I mean, you can't just positive think your way out of a physiological trap like that. Healing has to require a roadmap.
It absolutely requires a highly structured clinical map. Based on Dr. Judith Holman's foundational frameworks in trauma recovery, healing happens in very specific phases. And it is vital for listeners to understand that this is not a quick fix. You do not wake up one day and just let it go.
Let's explore that map. Where do you even begin when you are at absolute rock bottom?
You begin with stage 1, establishing safety and stabilization. It is a biological fact that you cannot heal in a burning building.
Right, you have to put the fire out first.
Yeah. You cannot process trauma while you are still actively being traumatized. So this phase requires securing physical, financial, and digital safety. It almost always necessitates going strictly no contact with the abuser or utilizing highly structured, impenetrable boundaries if contact is legally required. This phase is entirely about calming the immediate nervous system panic and dealing with the raw, terrifying shock of finally seeing the reality of the abuse without the camouflage.
And this brings up a massive curiosity gap for me and a point of serious despair for a lot of survivors. I hear this all the time. A victim finally leaves, they get their own apartment, they block the number, and they feel like their psychological state actually gets worse.
Yes, that is incredibly common.
They expect relief, but instead they feel like they are completely losing their minds. Why does the silence after the storm feel so chaotic?
It's a crucial question, and if you don't know the answer, you might run back to the abuser just to stop the chaos. There are two phenomena happening simultaneously here, one external, one internal. Externally, you have to understand that when a covert narcissist loses control of their primary source of supply, the camouflage often drops entirely and the abuse actually escalates.
Right, they don't just let you leave
But
peacefully.
they do not wish you well and let you walk away. They use digital tracking, anonymous social media accounts, and a tactic called triangulation, where they manipulate third parties, like mutual friends or family members, to turn against you. They orchestrate vicious smear campaigns to maintain their power and punish you for daring to leave.
It's the ultimate vindictive extinction burst. But what is happening internally to the survivor during that silence?
Internally, your nervous system, which has been in a braced survival freeze state for years, finally registers that there is no immediate tiger in the room. You are physically safe. And because you are finally safe, the brain says, okay, we have the bandwidth now. And it begins to process the massive, overwhelming backlog of terror, rage, and grief that you had to forcefully suppress just to survive the relationship.
So all that trauma stored in the somatic archive is suddenly being unpacked all at once. The chaos you feel isn't a regression. It's not a sign that you made a mistake by leaving.
It is the exact opposite. The chaos, the crying on the kitchen floor, the shaking, that is the first biological sign that your body finally feels safe enough to begin the true healing process.
Wow, that reframe changes everything.
It really does. Which naturally flows into the next phase of the roadmap, remembrance and mourning. Once you are physically stable, you have to grieve. And it is a deeply complex grief. You aren't just grieving the end of the relationship, you are grieving the illusion of the person you thought they were.
A mirage.
Right. You are mourning the idealized future that was promised to you. You are grieving the years of your life that were stolen. And crucially, this is the phase where you must reclaim healthy, protective anger.
I want to highlight that. Reclaiming anger. Because so many empathetic people have been taught their whole lives that anger is a bad emotion. But in the context of trauma recovery, anger is a vital medicine, isn't it? It's the emotion that says, what happened to me was wrong, it was unjust, and I did not deserve it.
Precisely. Toxic shame says, I am bad. Protective anger says, what you did to me was bad. Anger is the emotional fuel required to build and maintain boundaries. Once you have grieved and reclaimed that protective energy, you move into stage 3, identity reclamation. Because the narcissist eroded your entire sense of self, you have to rebuild self-trust from the ground up, usually through incredibly tiny, everyday decisions.
What does that look like practically?
It looks like standing in the grocery aisle and genuinely asking yourself, wait, do I actually like this brand of coffee, or did I just buy it for 5 years because my ex demanded it? It means discovering what kind of music you actually enjoy when no one is mocking your taste. It's a beautiful, albeit slow, process of re-inhabiting your own life.
And the final destination on this map.
Stage 4, integration. The trauma is no longer a radioactive core dictating your daily reactions. The abuse becomes a chapter in your history, a painful chapter, certainly, but it is no longer your entire identity.
Okay, so having the map is one thing. Knowing the destination is great.
Yeah.
But how do you actually travel the road? Because the clinical research we are looking at is quite firm on a very controversial point. Standard, traditional talk therapy often completely fails survivors of covert narcissistic abuse.
It does.
Sometimes it even makes them worse. Why is that?
It comes right back to the neurobiology. Standard talk therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a top-down approach. It uses logic, language, and high-level cognition in the prefrontal cortex to try and change your feelings. But remember, trauma from abuse is not stored in the logical brain. It is stored in the body and in the primitive survival-oriented parts of the brain, like the amygdala.
So using talk therapy for complex trauma is like trying to verbally reason with a blaring smoke alarm. You can stand there and logically explain to the alarm that there is no fire, but the alarm doesn't speak English. It only speaks smoke and heat. You have to literally open the windows and clear out the smoke to get it to stop.
That is exactly the dynamic. If you try to use logic with an amygdala that is actively on fire, it is an exercise in futility. Furthermore, there is a very real danger here. If a traditional therapist is not specifically trained in the nuances of covert coercive control, they might inadvertently engage in devastating victim blaming.
Because they just don't see it.
Exactly. Because the abuse is invisible, the therapist might view it as a simple communication issue. They might suggest couples counseling, which, by the way, is universally contraindicated in abusive dynamics, or they might ask the victim, well, what was your role in the conflict? How could you have communicated your needs better?
Oh, wow. Which just reinforces the abuser's gaslighting and the victim's toxic shame.
Okay.
It tells the victim, you are right, it actually is your fault.
It is profoundly re-traumatizing. True recovery from this specific injury requires specialized bottom-up modalities, therapies that bypass the logical brain and speak directly to the nervous system and the body.
Okay, so the sources highlight 3 specific bottom-up modalities: somatic experiencing, EMDR, and internal family systems. Let's break these down so people understand what they actually entail. Starting with somatic experiencing, which was developed by Dr. Peter Levine. This focuses heavily on the vagus nerve, correct?
Yes, it does. The vagus nerve is the superhighway of the nervous system, running from the brainstem all the way down into the gut. It controls our fight, flight, and freeze responses. Dr. Levine's premise is that trauma is essentially a thwarted survival response.
A thwarted survival response. Tell me more about that.
Think about it. When you were being verbally degraded or emotionally tortured by the narcissist, your biological instinct driven by your vagus nerve was to fight back or run away. But because fighting back would rapidly escalate the abuse and running wasn't possible in that moment, you had to suppress that massive surge of survival energy and go into a freeze state.
So that highly charged survival energy is literally trapped in your body like a tightly compressed spring. How does somatic experiencing release it?
Through a highly controlled process called titration. A somatic therapist doesn't ask you to sit on a couch and recount the entire horrifying story of the abuse. That would just overwhelm the system all over again. Instead, they help you tune into subtle physical sensations in the present moment. They take tiny, manageable shards of the trapped energy and allow the body to finally complete that thwarted response.
What does that look like in the room?
It might manifest physically in the session as spontaneous trembling, deep sobbing, or even the urge to physically push your hands against a wall. It is the body finally releasing the trapped shock.
That makes so much sense. You have to discharge the physical electricity before you can think clearly. Then there is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, developed by Francine Shapiro. This is highly recommended in the trauma research, but the sources attach a massive flashing warning sign to it.
They do, because EMDR is an incredibly powerful tool, but it must be handled with extreme care. The therapy utilizes bilateral stimulation.
Which means what exactly in a physical sense?
Right, so it could be like the patient following the therapist's finger back and forth with their eyes, or holding buzzers that tap alternately in the left and right hands. This bilateral movement forces communication between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, somewhat mimicking what happens during REM sleep.
Making the invisible visible here. What is the actual goal of doing that while thinking about a traumatic memory?
Well, when you experience a trauma, like a horrific gaslighting event, the memory gets stuck in the right hemisphere and the amygdala. It stays live. When you remember it, your body reacts as if it is happening right now in this exact moment.
You feel the panic all over again.
Exactly. The goal of EMDR is to take that highly charged, stuck memory, process it across the hemispheres, and move it into the brain's narrative memory network in the hippocampus. It literally files the memory away in the cabinet labeled things that happened in the past but are over now. The memory loses its emotional sting.
That sounds amazing, but what is the warning? Why is it dangerous to rush into?
Because if your nervous system has not been stabilized first. If you skipped stage 1 of the recovery map and you are still in a state of chronic overwhelm, jumping into EMDR will cause what is known as an amygdala hijack.
An amygdala hijack.
Yes. Opening up those raw, unprocessed memories without enough somatic grounding can completely flood the brain with terror, causing severe panic attacks and heavily re-traumatizing the patient. You have to build up your physical and emotional resources before you do the deep brain surgery of EMDR.
Got it. Okay, the third modality mentioned is internal family systems, or IFS. And looking at this, it seems perfectly designed to treat that agonizing cognitive dissonance we talked about earlier.
IFS is a brilliant framework. It conceptualizes the human psyche not as one single unified mind, but as a system of distinct parts. Under the extreme pressure of chronic abuse, our psyche naturally fragments to protect us. IFS helps resolve the brutal internal war that survivors endure.
So we're talking about the conflict between the part of you that completely despises the abuser for what they did and the part of you that desperately misses them and wants to call them because of the trauma bond.
Exactly. And then there is the inner critic part, the voice in your head that relentlessly shames you, saying, "You are so stupid for staying so long. How could you let them treat you like that?"
Right.
IFS also beautifully addresses the fawn response. We all know fight, flight, and freeze, but fawning is people-pleasing as a trauma response. It's the part of you that learned to instantly appease a threat to stay safe.
Oh, wow. People-pleasing as a trauma response.
Yes. In traditional therapy, you might try to force yourself to just stop people-pleasing. But in IFS, you learn to turn inward and offer profound self-compassion to that fawning part, acknowledging that it actually kept you alive. Once you stop fighting your own protective mechanisms, the core, authentic self can step forward and lead again.
This entire framework is so empowering. It takes away the shame and replaces it with actionable science. But I want to pivot to a very practical, often completely unavoidable reality. Everything we've discussed about healing requires safety, and usually that dictates a strict no-contact rule. But what happens when you cannot achieve total no contact? What if you share custody of a child with a covert narcissist? What if you were tied up in a 2-year divorce proceeding? Or you're contractually bound to work with them? How do you heal when the source of the poison is still in the room?
This is where boundary management transitions from a psychological concept into a matter of daily tactical survival. Many people in the pop psychology space are familiar with the concept of the gray rock method.
Right, gray rock.
Yeah.
The idea is to become as boring, flat, and unresponsive as a literal gray rock sitting in the dirt. You give one-word answers. You show zero emotion. The goal is to starve the abuser of the emotional reaction, the narcissistic supply that they're trying to extract from you.
And in theory, for short-term interactions, gray rock works. But the clinical sources and legal experts highlight massive problems with gray rock when it is applied to long-term, legally entangled situations. First, there is the legal danger. If you use the gray rock method in written communications that will be seen in family court, it can be easily weaponized against you.
How so?
A judge who does not understand covert abuse reading your one-word, cold, dismissive text messages might view you as the bitter, hostile, and uncooperative parent.
And the abuser looks like the victim again.
Exactly. They play the poor victim to the judge. But there is a second, even more profound problem with gray rock. For the victim themselves, especially if they are a highly sensitive person, a naturally empathetic individual, gray rock is soul-crushing. To maintain it, you are essentially forcing yourself to turn off your natural warmth, your empathy, and your humanity. You have to become cold and dead inside.
Which is just another form of self-abandonment, really. You are still contorting your personality to survive them. So what is the alternative? How do you protect yourself without losing your soul?
The solution, which is gaining major traction in family law, mediation, and therapeutic circles, is the yellow rock method. Yellow rock is an evolution. It takes the strict, impenetrable emotional neutrality of gray rock, but it packages it in a veneer of courteous, warm, civil professionalism.
Wait, I have to push back on this. If this person has psychologically tortured you, if they are actively trying to destroy your reputation, isn't being polite just letting them win? Doesn't being courteous invite them back in and signal that you are weak?
It is a vital question, and it is honestly the biggest hurdle for survivors to accept. But yellow rock is not about genuine warmth. It is about boundary setting disguised as impeccable etiquette. Think of it as emotional Kevlar. You are not interacting with an ex-partner or a family member. You're adopting the persona of a high-level human resources representative dealing with a difficult, erratic employee.
Okay, I like that framework. An HR rep doesn't get emotionally triggered, but they also aren't rude. So what is the exact tactical formula for a yellow rock communication? Let's say the covert narcissist sends you a raging, insulting email about child custody.
The formula is highly structured and must be followed relentlessly. First, you open with a polite, professional greeting. "Good morning, David. I hope you're having a productive week."
Even if they just sent you a page of insults.
Yes. Second, you write 1 to 5 factual, concise sentences focused exclusively on logistics. If his email spent 4 paragraphs calling you a terrible parent, a failure, and bringing up mistakes you made 5 years ago, you ignore all of it. You do not defend yourself. You do not correct the record. You only address the logistics. Regarding the schedule, I will drop the kids off at soccer practice at 5 p.m. on Thursday.
And then?
And third, a courteous closing. Thank you. Have a good day.
That is incredibly disciplined. What is the unconscious psychological mechanism at play here? Why does this specific structure work against a covert narcissist?
Two powerful psychological forces are operating simultaneously. First, operant conditioning. You are still denying the abuser the reward fuel of your distress. They push the button, they send the fiery email, but the slot machine doesn't pay out. They get zero emotional reaction.
And the second force.
Second, you are weaponizing cognitive dissonance against the abuser. They send an insulting, chaotic message expecting outrage, defense, and a huge fight. Instead, they receive a bland, perfectly polite HR memo. It completely disrupts their script. It leaves them with nowhere to direct their toxic energy.
And from a tactical standpoint, it creates a bulletproof paper trail. If they drag you into family court, the judge sees the abuser being erratic, combative, and abusive, and sees you being unfailingly polite, reasonable, and laser-focused on the well-being of the child or the logistics of the task.
Exactly. It protects your legal standing perfectly. But infinitely more important than that, it protects your authentic self. You do not have to become a cold, unfeeling gray rock to protect yourself. You get to maintain your dignity, your professionalism, and your inherent grace. You stay true to who you are while remaining absolutely impenetrable.
We have covered incredible ground today. We have taken the invisible carbon monoxide poison of covert coercive control and made it visible. We've decoded how intermittent reinforcement biologically hijacks the brain, wiring it into a trauma bond. We've validated the agonizing physical reality of the somatic archive and complex PTSD. And we've mapped out a highly clinical bottom-up path to freedom using therapies that actually speak the language of the nervous system.
It is a profound, grueling journey from being systematically dismantled to being deliberately reassembled. The courage it takes for a survivor to walk this road cannot be overstated.
Which brings us to the end of the map. As people do this intense rewiring, what is the ultimate outcome? Because so many people just want to wake up and feel like the person they were before they ever met the abuser.
That is the most common desire. But I want to leave you with a transformative shift in perspective, one that touches on the very evolution of human empathy and generational healing. True recovery is not about going backwards. You cannot return to the person you were before the abuse. That previous version of you, while beautiful, empathetic, and trusting, possessed unmet wounds and blind spots that were vulnerable to this specific dynamic.
Right. So where do they go?
What the research into post-traumatic growth and even epigenetics is beginning to show us is that surviving and integrating this level of psychological warfare does something radical. When you heal from covert abuse, you don't just repair a relationship pattern, you actively break a generational curse.
Wow. Break a generational curse.
Yes. The toxic shame and the emotional blindness that covert narcissism relies on are almost always passed down through family lines. By doing the grueling work of somatic processing, of reclaiming your identity, and of establishing impenetrable boundaries, you are acting as a biological cycle breaker. You emerge as an entirely new, deeply anchored iteration of humanity, someone whose intuition is razor sharp, whose boundaries cannot be compromised, and whose immense capacity for authentic love is now permanently protected by the profound, hard-won wisdom of having survived the dark.
You x-ray the invisible break, you clear the smoke from the alarm, and you heal back stronger, wiser, and fundamentally unbroken. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.